Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at HOKA's fastest running shoe. It's the Cielo X1 2.0. We're also going to compare it to the previous version, the 1.0, to see what changed. There's a lot of similarities, but honestly, I'll call this a complete redesign, so let's break it down. Before we get started, I do want to say that these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video. This file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. The HOKA Cielo X1 2.0, and I do mean 2.0, not HOKA Cielo X2. It's a little bit confusing, but for whatever reason, HOKA opted to add the 2.0 on the back of the name. You can see it on the back of the heel counter. So all you need to know is this is the old version, this is the new version, and this new version, which has been pretty much redesigned, is their top tier super elite racing shoe for the half or full marathon. HOKA does have another racing option, which is the Rocket, but when I talk to HOKA, they really consider the Cielo to be their best of the best racing shoe. The stats are somewhat similar. Both shoes cost $275, about what you expect for the racing shoe space. Both shoes have, at least on paper, 39 millimeters in the heel and 32 in the forefoot for a 7 millimeter drop. There's some kind of context I need to give to that, but I'll touch on that later in the review. And then the biggest change really comes down to the weight. On the 1.0, it weighed 9.3 ounces, which is pretty darn heavy for a racing shoe, and that's been completely changed as the Cielo X1 2.0 is now 8.1 ounces, which is a big change from before. However, it's not the lightest racing shoe out there, but I do think this is a huge step in the right direction for the Cielo X1 line. Moving on to the uppers, they feel very different. You can tell this is a redesign. Both shoes fit true to size. However, on the 1.0, you have a little bit more volume and it feels slightly more accommodating. While on the 2.0, it's going to be a more snug race day fit, which I think is important when you sit on such an aggressive platform. When it comes to the upper materials, they are very different as well. On the 1.0, you have an engineered knit. It's rather unique. You basically have these lines with these small stitching points in between them. You can see practically directly into the shoe, creates for a very open and breathable experience. And then on the 2.0, we have an engineered jacquard mesh, but I'm not sure that's the best way I would describe it. It feels like a rather synthetic material. You have these very tiny holes which allow for some airflow, but I would not consider this the most breathable shoe ever, especially when you compare it to the 1.0. The tongues are not alike at all. On the 1.0, we have a very stretchy and elastic knit tongue with a large tongue pull tab. The tongue here is gusseted. That has been refined and simplified on the 2.0. It's a much thinner and non-gusseted tongue that does have a little bit of elasticity or stretchiness to it. They also added a overlay at the top to help with lace pressure protection. I think it works. I think it gets the job done, and despite it not being gusseted, it didn't move around on me at all. I did find the 1.0 tongue to be a little bit difficult to kind of get to lay perfectly flat and had some bunching up. It is kind of fun and easy to get your foot in and out of the shoe compared to the 1.0, but or at least compared to the 2.0, but the tongue on the 2.0 is much more streamlined. Then if we talk about the lacing system, it was pretty darn difficult on the 1.0 because they double looped the laces, so they go through two separate points in the upper on each lacing point, and you have these large wide flat laces where it's a much more traditional setup here on the 2.0, where it's just a single entry point, making it easier to really configure the lacing setup and get everything situated perfectly. And then finally, if we move to the heel counter on the 2.0, it's a more traditional heel counter setup, fairly rigid and well constructed. Surprised to see such a robust heel counter on a racing shoe. And if we compare that to the 1.0, it's going to be a lot more flexible and minimal. I actually kind of expected to see this more minimal heel counter on the 2.0, but I am happy they opted for a more traditional setup just because I often find these more well-structured heel counters provide a better lockdown. And when it comes to lockdown, I was really happy with this slightly more snug fit, the tongue being a little more streamlined, the lacing system being easier to configure, and the heel counter providing a slightly more plush and well-structured lockdown. So I do think this is a small improvement over the 1.0. Again, just becomes a little bit more race day focused compared to its predecessor. And then if we move on to the midsole, both the 1.0 and 2.0 have the same general kind of concept of making a running shoe that has a very aggressive rocker geometry. However, they execute it in very different ways. If we take a look at the 2.0, you'll notice that the lateral cutout is no longer there. You can see that here on the 1.0 because they moved it over here to the medial side. They also drastically reduced the size and width of the heel. When you line these shoes up, you'll notice that there is a lot less foam towards the back. And then they also just changed the carbon fiber plate. This actually has a forked rear portion to the plate. There's some holes through it. And in my opinion, this feels a little bit more flexible, has a little more bend to it compared to the 1.0, which feels much more stiff and rigid. Now that might partially be the plate, but also I think there's a little bit more foam in the 1.0 in this midsole as well, which kind of contributes to the overall stiffness. The 2.0 also has less stability wings integrated into its carbon fiber plate. There's one slightly towards the lateral part of the forefoot, and then there's another one on the medial side, where on the 1.0 you have two on the lateral side and one on the medial side. I'll also say that both shoes have something called a forefoot focused active foot frame, which essentially means you kind of have these walls of foam towards the front to keep your foot contained as you're really kind of rolling through and pushing the pace to give you some containment and some stability in this rather kind of unstable and aggressive super shoe. And speaking of stability, the 2.0 is significantly less stable compared to the 1.0. That's mainly because they reduced so much foam in the heel. Really, when you line these up, you'll notice a significant difference. And when you kind of flip the shoes around, you have a lot more cutouts and holes in the midsole compared to the 1.0. Now, it just really depends on what you're looking for. I think if your form starts to break down, I really like how the Cielo X1 gives you a bit more support. However, if you're all gas and no brakes, I think you'll appreciate the truly aggressive nature of the 2.0. The midsole on the 2.0 is insanely unique. Might be too different for some runners. The best way I can describe how it feels is with the kind of foam removed from the heel section. It almost feels like you have this large ball of bouncy foam towards the center or midfoot area. So if you land on your midfoot or forefoot, it just kind of compresses and pushes you forward into the insanely aggressive rocker geometry, which is experienced on both shoes. I think that's kind of the unique identity that the Cielo X1 brings. Now, I think for the 2.0, it really rewards those forefoot to midfoot strikers just because, again, so much is removed from the heel. The forefoot section is insanely wide. It just kind of feels like you're pushing off of this massive platform with a bouncy ball under your midfoot, and it just makes you want to run fast. It really is such a different experience, where I think the 1.0 was a little bit less aggressive just because the heel was more filled in. You get away with some heel striking and less aggressive strides, where the 2.0 is really just for those who want to kind of push it all the way and take a very aggressive stance on race day. Now, I have to say the 1.0 does have a special place in my heart. I really like this as a long run shoe, use it for some speed workouts, and it was just insanely fun, mainly because I think it had a wider range of runs available to it. It's a bit more versatile, where I think the 2.0 becomes a true super race day shoe for those that want to push it. I think Mizuno does a similar thing where they just kind of carve away a ton from the back portion, give you a larger than life midfoot section and a crazy rocker geometry. So I think it's kind of HOKA's take on it. Might not be for everyone. For me, I probably kind of maybe prefer this for the shorter race distances. I like to have a little bit more support for longer efforts. And yeah, the 1.0, I still really like this thing. It's not a bad shoe. Yes, the lacing system was a little weird, and the upper itself maybe a little bit kind of different and unique. And the shoe was slightly heavy, but still a super fun shoe. Maybe not the most aggressive race day shoe, but it's still fun nonetheless. Moving on to the outsoles, the 1.0 definitely has more surface area and rubber compared to the 2.0, and that's partially because you have a little bit more cutouts in the midsole itself. Now, the rubber on the 2.0 is going to be sticky rubber, which is supposed to be a little bit better for overall efficiency. I thought it works well, no complaints whatsoever. I just didn't notice a massive change or improvement compared to the 1.0. I think I was more focused on all the other kind of crazy geometry, weight, and upper changes between the two shoes. I do think you'll probably have a little bit less durability with the 2.0 just because there is a lot less rubber and rubber coverage compared to the 1.0, so I would keep that in mind. Well, that concludes the review. Let me know in the comments which Cielo model you'll be going with, or do you want to go with the Rocket series from HOKA? I would love to hear from you. I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.